live! Hello, everyone, and welcome to Samantha Politics, a show where we talk about global politics and women's rights. We have a great show coming up.
On the military for the genocide against the Rohingya. So
as these poor people are being attacked, people are hiding in their offices. You guys saw a guest.
We're going to be talking about Burma and Russia today, but just a quick U.S. Native American Secretary of the Interior. Now, this is really monumental because
I'm Samantha Karlin, your host of Samantha Politics, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Let's talk Venezuela. I wanted to give you an update on the situation that's going on and my take on it. So, if you've been following, the Gerald Ford, the U.S.'s largest and newest aircraft carrier, just pulled into the Caribbean. It was taken from the Mediterranean and put into the Caribbean off the coast of Venezuela. It has about 5,000 sailors on it, has more than 75 attack, surveillance, and support aircraft, including F-18 fighters. Now, this is in addition to 8 warships, F-35 fighter jets, and at least 1 nuclear-powered submarine in the Caribbean, as well as B-52 and B-1 bombers from bases in Louisiana and Texas. They've been flying missions off the coast of Venezuela to try to scare them. It's called a show of force. So B-52s, if you didn't know, they can carry precision-guided bombs, and B-1s can carry up to 75,000 pounds of guided and unguided munitions. So huge buildup off the coast of the Caribbean. So what's going to happen with Venezuela? Well, a couple of things that are important to remember about Venezuela. First of all, Venezuela is home to the world's largest oil reserves. And it once was an extremely prosperous country because it has so much oil. It's also Latin America's longest democracy prior to the Maduro Chavez days. So what's going on now? What do we think is going to happen in Venezuela? Well, Trump has been accusing Maduro of fueling the border crisis, of releasing people from his prisons and mental institutions, and sending Tren de Agua gang members to the United States. So what's been happening is that the United States has been bombing ships that are coming from Venezuela. They have mounted at least 17 strikes. Estimates are around killing around 76 people. We don't really know who these people are. The United States, a la Hegseth and Trump, say that they're drug smugglers, but we don't really know because the intelligence that they provided are nothing more than fuzzy photographs. So it's unclear if these are civilian fishermen or if they're actually drug smugglers. Even if they are drug smugglers, the correct course of action is to board the ship, investigate, confiscate any drugs if there are, take people into custody if they are committing a crime, and put them through due process, because that's what countries that obey the law do. But in Trump world, he doesn't obey the law, just like, ICE is just stealing people off the streets and putting them into unmarked vans like child predators and then sticking them to prison, and then their families don't hear from them for weeks. And sometimes they're actually American citizens, which is wild. So these amount to extrajudicial killings. They've mounted at least 17 strikes, and estimates say that they've killed around 76 people. There's no right to just bomb civilians under suspected drug smuggling that hasn't been proven, when there's a much easier way to go about it and then actually get evidence. The other thing to know about the people on these ships, these are not the kingpins. These are likely poor Venezuelans that are taking these trafficking jobs because they have no income, because the country is in freefall economic crisis, and it's the only way they can earn money for their families. Yes, I know I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, but these are not kingpins who are, it's going to, this is not Chapo. It's going to unleash everything. And, Chapo in Mexico, or the whole empire of drug cartels is going to die. Even if they were found guilty, there's no law that has the death penalty for drug trafficking. So that is not the correct punishment for this crime that was never proven. It's also suspect that Admiral Alvin Halsey abruptly announced his resignation last month as head of Southcom, and people say, even though he hasn't come out publicly, that he was deeply critical of these bombing these ships. In addition, the British have stopped sharing intelligence with us about ships coming into the Caribbean from Venezuela because they don't want to be complicit in what they see as extrajudicial killings that are against international law. And the interesting thing about Venezuela to know too is that Venezuela actually does not produce the drugs that are coming to the US. Most of the fentanyl is coming from Mexico and the cocaine is coming from Colombia. It is, however, a transit spot that those drugs run through to get to America, but it's not actually the producer of the majority of the drugs that are reaching the United States. So what do we have? We've got souped up troops near the Venezuelan border in the ocean, and souped up ships all ready to roll. It is the largest amass of that kind of buildup in the Caribbean for a very, very, very long time. And the other thing that we have is these bombings of these ships and killing civilians without due process. Now, the other thing that's going on is that the country itself is in a moment of extreme discontent. There's extreme poverty. The country has been in freefall economic crisis from when there was a huge collapse in oil prices because the entire economy was based upon the price of oil. You have people that don't have health care. The education system has tanked. The healthcare system is totally broken. And in the last elections, because things are just so bad in Venezuela and also so many people have fled, Maria Corina Machado ran against Nicolas Maduro in the primaries. She won with 95% of the vote. So he said, in classic dictator mode, you can't run against me again in the actual elections because I don't want you to win. So give me a list of people that will run in your place. And he picked Edmundo Gonzalez, who was a retired Foreign Service officer. I think because he was kind of like a grandpa. So people said, okay, this guy, can run for president. Well, they were smarter than Maduro because they had printouts of every polling place that showed who people voted for. So, of course, after the elections, Maduro said that he won. The ballot showed a much different story with Gonzalez overwhelmingly taking the election and the presidency. Maduro never accepted that, and Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado, who was behind his win, have been in exile, fleeing, hiding, all sorts of stuff to avoid Maduro, who is still in power. So high levels of discontent in the country. There's been some desertions from the military, but there's also a lot of loyalty in the military still to Maduro. What could potentially happen? One more thing that's happened is that when Maria Corina Machado was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, she said, I owe this to Trump, or, this belongs to Trump, something along those lines, which to me indicated that she wants the United States support in overthrowing Nicolas Maduro. So, what's going to happen now? Well, Americans overwhelmingly do not support overthrowing Maduro by military force. It reminds us too much of Iraq and Saddam Hussein, and then a power vacuum, which then caused ISIS, et cetera, et cetera. So the American public doesn't really want that to happen. However, I think that Marco Rubio has been gearing up for this for a long time and been wanting to take down Maduro. Also, because there's the world's largest oil reserves in Venezuela, there's a ton of interest from Trump, who has stars in his eyes and is basically thinking, how can we get control of that oil? He's allowed Chevron to still operate there. I think his vision is to somehow get some kind of deal where he's getting money from Venezuela oil field or taking the oil fields. I don't really completely know there, but I think he's got dollar signs in his eyes. This is not a country that does not have resources. It has plenty of resources, and it once was an extremely wealthy country with a great healthcare system, good education, and it's basically been pushed into complete and total despair and poverty by the Maduro regime. So I've been looking at all of the research and seeing, okay, what could possibly happen? So there's a couple of different scenarios. So according to an article by David Sanger, also a Fletcher alum, he's saying there's 3 possibilities: potential airstrikes against military facilities, which maybe would make Maduro flee. I think that this is the most likely scenario, that not necessarily that there's airstrikes, but maybe that there's enough that forces him to say, uh-oh, this is not a joke. I got to get out of here. And he takes exile in Russia or Iran or a country that is also in autocracy. And I think that the Trump administration, in an ideal world, is going to try to do as much as they can to spook him and get him to leave voluntarily. That, or other options that Sanger says, is that we could send in SEAL Team 6 or the Delta Forces to capture and kill him in a targeted assassination. There is a $50 million reward for his arrest or conviction. Kind of like, the Osama bin Laden raid. I don't know if this is... Again, I think the first option is the most likely scenario. I don't see that happening, but again, I don't know, because basically Trump is saying that legally it would be justified because he's trying to say that he's the head of a gang network or a cartel network, and therefore he deserves to be killed, or it's allowed that he's killed because he's a criminal. Another option is that the U.S. sends counterterrorism forces to take control of airfields and maybe some oil fields and infrastructure. The U.S. population does not support troops on the ground. I do not see the U.S. going in with troops on the ground to take over oil fields. And this would also be a threat to civilians. The Venezuelan military would come out in full force. I don't see this one happening. So those are kind of the situations, but I thought that the analysis saying that the analysis that the administration is going to do as much as they can to either spook Maduro or to shake up the elite that surrounds him and is advising him, to spook them enough that they call for him to leave and they tell him that he has to give up power or else the United States is going to strike and it's going to be a disaster. So that's my hot take on Venezuela. I think the big thing to know, too, is whatever happens in Venezuela, if Maduro does leave power, he's totally made all of the institutions bow over to him. It's also, he's ruined a lot of the institutions. He's ruined education. He's ruined the medical system. People are living in deep despair and poverty. And there's going to have to be new systems, institution, maybe a new constitution built. So if Maria Corina Machado and Gonzalez and allies were to take over, they've definitely got their work cut out for them. But I think that they could do it. That's my pipe dream, I guess I would say. And you have to understand Maria Corina Machado, another reason she's really popular is because there's been so much of the diaspora is in other places because they've had to flee because the economic situation is so bad, the human rights situation is so bad. All of these people have left the country, and she had this really powerful music video with a popular Venezuelan artist where it was images of all these people living in other countries, Venezuelans, taking their bags and all of a sudden just putting them down and fleeing back towards Venezuela to be back with their families. And I think there is this dream of these families coming back together in Venezuela and not having to live in exile in Spain, in the US, in Colombia, which has actually taken most of the migrants from Venezuela. They want to go home, but they also can't go home in the current state of affairs. So that's what I think is going to happen in Venezuela. I'm not sure, but that's my hot take. And I will say, too, that Venezuelans overwhelmingly support some kind of intervention in Venezuela to oust Maduro, because I think what Corina Machado realizes is without external support, there's no way they're going to get him out. The big linchpin of authoritarian regimes falling is when the military and the police defect to civil society, and though there have been some desertions, they're mostly still loyal to him, and I don't really see that happening. I think one thing that's really important to mention, too, is that Maria Corina Machado is like the opposite of Trump and Maduro. She leads by love. She cares about healthcare and education. She is about family and taking care of people. She is a love-based leader. And one thing that's also really important is that I think if she had called for violence, her supporters already would have taken up violence and they would be in a civil war, because she's so popular and she has explicitly, repeatedly called for nonviolence and said, do not take up arms. That's also really important to know and represents like a really feminist style of leadership of, no, we're going to take this down through passionate civil resistance and allyship and strategy and whatever it is, but we are not going to take up arms. And that's also a really important point to make, is that the Venezuelan people have come out in full force, but they have not turned this into a civil war, which it easily could have become with a different type of leader. If you thought that this was helpful analysis, make sure to subscribe to Samantha Politics. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, give us 5 stars. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed. Send this to your friends, and have an awesome night.